C'était en l'an 1811, au bout de la saison des carnivals.
It was the beginning of carnival season in 1811. Celebrations would soon begin. The sugar crops have been harvested, and so the traditions of dining, dancing, and debauchery were all on full display amongst the slavers and their ilk. And within their excess, we saw our chance. We had heard of other uprisings in Haiti, and from the stories we took inspiration. We gathered militia uniforms from Andre's stockpile, armed ourselves with whatever we could find, and began our march. Horses, knives, and a few guns were our armory as we moved from plantation to plantation, gathering those who would follow. Andre, his militia, and men from the governor attempted to meet us at Forchet Plantation, but we had escaped upriver in the night to Bernoulli Plantation. It was here we fought, trying to gain higher ground. But as we were surrounded with trained militia and superior weapons, our ranks began to fall. Those who didn't meet their end on the battlefield were brought to trial. The following from the proceedings at Destrehan Plantation.
Upon which the Tribunal, acting in accordance with the authority conferred upon it by the law, and acting upon a desire to satisfy the wish of the citizenry, does condemn to death, without qualification, the 18 individuals named above. The judgment is sustained today, the 15th day of January, and shall be executed as soon as possible by a detachment of militia, which shall take the condemned to the plantation of their owners, and there the condemned shall be shot to death. The tribunal decrees that the sentence of death shall be carried out without any preceding torture. It further decrees that the heads of the executed shall be cut off and placed atop a pole on the spot where all can see the punishment meted out for such crimes. Also, as a terrible example to all who would disturb the public tranquility in the future.
So remember, this road that you travel, which was for a few short days what we believed to be a road to freedom, became a tool of intimidation. By the end of January 1811, nearly 100 heads were displayed on the levee, from Place d'Armes in central New Orleans, along the river road to the plantation district and Andre's plantation, a reminder for all who passed. This trail shall serve not only as a memorial of America's first freedom march, but also as a symbol of this country's continued struggles, as all people rightly demand equality.
Today we unveiled the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail, and it started with an idea of how do we complete the story of River Parish's complex history, and the 1811 Slave Revolt was a monumental moment for our region, but it was America's largest slave revolt. And so we decided that we would commemorate and honor those participants in that revolt who were fighting for their freedom back in 1811 by launching a trail, and the experience extends through two of our parishes on both sides of the river. It starts in La Place at the site where the revolt actually started, and in the river parishes it ends at Destrehan Plantation, where one of the trials were held about, for all the revolters to determine what their fate was. And some of them escaped, some were killed, and some were sent back to their plantations. So we know how it ended, but the struggle for freedom and civil rights is still ongoing, and so we thought it would be appropriate during the 210th anniversary to launch this trail. It's about 10 kiosks along 10 miles of the river. The rest of the kiosks will be installed before Juneteenth later this year. And part of our most favorite part of the trail is the audio tour, which we were able to get New Orleans native and world-renowned actor Wendell Pierce to record the voice of the revolt's leader telling the story as the listener, the visitor, goes through and drives the route that was taken in 1811. They'll hear it told as if they were there.
Here at Destrehan Plantation, our mission is to preserve and tell the history of Destrehan, and that's what we're doing here today. 1811 Slave Revolt, of course, was a big part of the history here at Destrehan Plantation, which took place 210 years ago. 3 of the trials were actually held here at Destrehan Plantation. It's so relevant even today because you're talking about what's happening in our society today and how we can still continue to look at government and the systems of the government and things of that nature. And we can go back as far as 210 years ago to see the struggles that were taking place back then and how it's relevant today. And so we want to tell that history. You don't want to ever forget that history, and that's what we're doing here. Trials were held on 3 different days here at Destrehan Plantation. I believe approximately 17 of the insurgents enslaved were held on trial here. 3 of the enslaved from Destrehan Plantation were tried, convicted, and executed from the 1811 Slave Revolt. Basically, what I see around the grounds, of course, is 233 years of what existed here, the house, some of the outbuildings that we have, and the trees, of course. But what we're most proud of is telling the history here and continuing to preserve and tell that history. This was a French Creole plantation owned by a Frenchman, Jean-Noel Destrehan. You had settlers from German. This is actually known as the German coast. So there were a lot of German families living in this area, Native Americans, Spaniards. And so it captured a lot of different culture. And what was going on here at the time was the sugarcane production and manufacturing. In fact, this plantation actually had a sugarcane plant located on it. So they not only grew the sugarcane, but they processed it at one point in time. And that was the major crop that was being grown here.
Welcome to Louisiana's River Parishes, the site of the 1811 Slave Revolt as told in the modern day by actor Wendell Pierce. We're here today at the beginning of Black History Month on purpose. Black History Month is to honor the journey of all black people in America. And that journey included the 1811 Slave Revolt, which started in Laplace, ended in Kenner, and one of the trials were held here at Destrehan Plantation. It was a pivotal time in the River Parishes because it was actually, for the plantation owners, a horror of a time. And the insurrection was put down and the trials were held to make sure that it didn't happen again back then. But not only was it pivotal for us, it was pivotal for America's history. It was America's largest slave revolt in her history. And while it might have been our region's wealthiest time, the River Parishes had more millionaires on this stretch of the river than the rest of the country did. It was America's darkest chapter. And today, alongside elected officials, the parish presidents that represent the areas where the revolt happened, our commissioners, we're here today to commemorate that moment, to make sure that we complete the circle of the narrative of the complex history that's involved with African Americans, people of color, and our plantation history. For a long time, this commission the perception was it told one side of that story. This is about making sure that we tell the other side, and that those who revolted, those who demanded their freedom, those who demanded equality, that they're remembered and that they are honored. So this trail starts at the 1811 Kidori House in Laplace. It ends here at Destrehan Plantation. Those kiosks are installed, and there's one installed at historic Riverlands Church in Reserve, and an extended experience where the memorial is held for those who were beheaded at the Whitney Plantation. Another 6 kiosks will be installed between now and Juneteenth. Juneteenth is another pivotal day in the story of black people in America, the day that they were set free from slavery. And so we feel it's a good bookend to the 1811 Slave Revolt when they demanded freedom, and we'll finish installing the rest of the trail in the honoring of the holiday where they gained their freedom. So we will install those over the next couple of months. The tour, as you heard, read by Wendell Pierce, New Orleans native and world-renowned actor, is from the perspective of the lead revolter. And we wanted the person, the viewer, the visitor, listening to that tour to feel as if they're there. And I think we heard that in the first remarks, and we'll hear a little bit more of the tour in a bit. The tour is free. It's available to anyone that wants to go online at 1811slaverevolt.com and learn about it. Or They can visit the kiosks, right? They're outside of every gate of the attractions. You don't have to pay to experience and learn more about this history. We hope you do. We hope you go inside of the attractions. We hope you learn more. But this was a project of the Tourist Commission to make sure that this story was told without any cost associated to learning more about it. So the extended experiences are about the future. Historic Riverlands Christian Center, we'll hear about it a little bit later. It's about the future of the impact of those who were enslaved that was made on the music of America and other elements of their story. So be sure to visit the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail, the 1811slaverevolt.com. And I want to make a few more comments about where this leads us to. Our next initiative being launched by the River Parishes Tourist Commission is called the Headwaters Project. We're the River Parishes. The headwaters are where a river begins. And so the Headwaters Project will be a never-ending project, in my opinion, where the burden is put on the Commission, our stakeholders, and our community to identify, collect, preserve, and then promote the genealogical records and slave burial grounds of those who were brought here and enslaved, to make sure that their spirit lives into the future and that we honor their contribution to this region so that we can be a place that descendants of enslaved can visit to learn more about their family history, because a lot of times the history of that person who was brought here for enslavement ended when they got to the plantation. They were given a new name, they were given a new religion, and their entire history was erased. That was done on purpose. So the Headwaters Project is going to be about going backwards and going back to the original place where those people came from or were brought from, and making sure that we can be a place for all people to learn about their history, not just one version of it. Also, the 1811 Slave Revolt is available on a digital passport that we're launching next week. It's part of a new initiative of the Tourism Commission. And before I bring up our chairman, I want to thank our Tourism Commission, who in 2019 signed the contracts and approved the contracts with the multiple firms. They approved multiple funding sources for projects that we've launched. And then COVID happened and our budgets crashed by 50%. And the board decided to reach into our reserves, our investments, to make sure that these projects still happened, so that when people traveled again, we were ready to welcome them. So I need to thank and acknowledge our board members. Thank you all. Commissioner Robert Taylor is now here, so thank you for coming, sir. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Graham Group and Wynn Waltman for the work that they did on this trail. They were one of our firms that put together many of our projects, but specifically this 1811 Slave Revolt Trail. And with that, I will introduce our chairman, Mr. Garrett Monty, a member of the St. Charles Representatives of the Tourism Commission.
On behalf of the Commission, I would like to thank everyone for coming out here today to commemorate the 210th anniversary of the 1811 Slave Revolt. Our team has been working on this for over a year, and this is such a special day to officially launch the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail and detail the heroism of these men and women of the River Parishes. The Commission felt that it was imperative to immortalize these freedom fighters' contributions and educate all who visit or study in our area about the monumental sacrifices to modern society and the development of civil rights. While people travel to our region for our food and attractions, visitors also enjoy learning about our rich history. This is undoubtedly America's darkest chapter, but all of our stories must be told. We invite our residents and visitors to learn more about the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail through this immersive and interactive trail. We look forward to continuing to tell the story of this pivotal moment in our region's history and American history for years to come. Thank you.
I'm sure it's been mentioned several times that this year marks the 210th anniversary of this 1811 Slave Revolt. But what I'd like to keep in our minds today is 200 to 500 enslaved men and women sought fit to march along for their freedom, hoping to gain their freedom. However, today we want to mark that in our hearts, on our calendars, for our children, for all of America, to remember this moment for those people. That 10-mile span between the Kidori historic house, where the uprising began, on the night of January 8. And it may seem strange, but not always. Generally, when we prepare for something and we release that particular venture, it happens during the night. So when we say sometimes there are people that don't sleep at night, I'm sure that was a time for them. The nearby experiences can be seen as I was able to visit along with my grandchild, who at the time was only 4 years old. You can visit that memorial area at the Whitney Plantation. It gives you chills when you go there. You can feel the hair moving on your arms. But it's an important place for us to visit, to help us to remember. Because you see, we all were taught that if we see something, if we hear something, if we speak of something, it can be easily remembered. We believe that the 1811 slave revolt will provide a much needed economic and tourism boost for our region, simply because of much of the words that I have said already. I cannot express the importance of bringing this information to life for those lives that are among us and those lives that are coming behind us. You see, many of us here today have lived longer than we have yet to live. But we know that our lives exist with bringing up grandkids, for example, or our children. And it is important for us, as we are here, to make that information known to them. So I say to you, the river region has done just that. And I would hope that many of us take advantage of visiting those areas so that we ourselves can be re-educated and reminded of what those people went through. And I'm going to leave you with this. We cannot have an eye for an eye because the world would be blind. So let us all learn to live together, and please enjoy the tourism that we, Louisiana, River Parishes Tourism, has put together for the slave revolt. And I think at this moment, we should honor and give a clap for those 200 to 500 people who took a stand. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank our commissioner from St. John, Miss Elizabeth Joseph, for those wonderful remarks. I'd also like to recognize Mr. Robert Taylor, another one of the St. John commissioners on the River Parish Tourist Commission, for being here. And I'd like to acknowledge Stephen and Rita Perilou with Riverlands Christian Center and Charlotte Jones of the Kid Ory House. If you have not visited either of those, I really recommend that. I have not visited the Kid Ory House just yet. My staff did. I had a conflict. I've been inside the Riverlands Christian Center, and it's one of those moments, as Miss Betty mentioned, that you feel it's an emotional experience before you actually learn anything. So I would encourage you to visit both of those. Thank you, Buddy, Garrett, the River Parish Tourist Commission, and all who are involved in today's historic event during Black History Month. Today and every day, we should remember the courageous men and women who sacrificed their lives during the 1811 slave revolt in hopes of providing a better life for their families and a better future for those that would follow. St. John is proud to play a part in the 1811 slave revolt trail, which not only provides an economic tourism boost for our region, but brings much needed attention, history, and culture for many generations to come. On Tuesday, our staff and council participated in the ribbon cutting and grand opening for the Kid Ory House, which was the start of the insurrection and path to where we are standing now. I would invite everyone to visit and learn more about this powerful moment in our nation's history, as well as Kid Ory, the great New Orleans trombonist who was born there. The Kid Ory House is located at 1128 Highway 628 in LaPlace, and tours are given daily from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., except on Mondays. And nearby experiences at Whitney Plantation and the historic Riverlands Christian Center are also available to visitors in St. John. It's been said that you can tell a great deal about a country and a people by what they deem important enough to remember. The launch of the 1811 Slave Revolt, the Kid Ory Historic House, and others represent an opportunity to bring people together to remember, not just during Black History Month, but all of the time. We are excited about this effort, and we are encouraged that we are moving forward to better and brighter days. And as Pastor Paralou even mentioned about how all of us, we bleed the same, it's even more so symbolic because it's Heart History Month, so a lot of us are wearing red. And that also should remind us that he is correct, that we all bleed the same and we should love each other and treat each other in that same manner. And hopefully that's where we're going in the future. So I want to thank the commission again. Thank you, Buddy. Please visit the 1811slaverevolt.com for more information. And I'd like to thank the River Parish Tourist Commission for all of their hard work for bringing these historic moments, these moments that we must not forget, these moments that we must continue to remember and reflect upon so that history is not repeated again. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Buddy, for inviting me to commemorate the 210th anniversary of the 1811 Slave Revolt and this interactive exhibit in the River Parishes. First, I'd like to thank the River Parish Tourist Commission and their director, Buddy Bowe, his staff, all the commissioners, especially our commissioners in St. Charles Parish, Mr. Garrett Monty, Mr. Tracy Smith, who runs the plantation here, and Mr. Ricardo Smith, for bringing this educational experience to life, and for taking the initiative to preserve both the good and the bad history in our region, the River Parishes. President John F. Kennedy famously said in his Nation of Immigrants speech, "Perhaps our brightest hope for the future lies in our lessons of the past." Remembering our history and where we come from as a people and a nation is essential for securing our future. Our collective differences, experiences create our history, and by reflecting on what once was, we gain a better understanding of the world around us. Today, we stand in front of the Destrehan plantation, which was established in 1787 and is the oldest documented plantation along the lower Mississippi River. It was designed and built by an enslaved man named Charles Paquet at the direction of Robert Delaunay. After Robin Delaunay's death, this plantation was purchased by his daughter Celeste and her husband Jean-Noel Destrehan, for which it is named. People coming to visit this historic site are always amazed at the amount of information that has been unearthed regarding the people, both free and enslaved, who lived here. The work being done here to preserve our history is not only invaluable to the people of this parish, but also to the generations of people coming to learn about our past. And since 1791, the River Road Historical Society has ensured that the events that have taken place along the Mississippi remain intact, and now Destrehan Plantation will also be a part of this to ensure that the story of the 1811 Slave Revolt is never forgotten. Guided tours will now include this permanent exhibit that pays tribute to the enslaved who risked their lives to participate in the nation's largest slave revolt. Destrehan Plantation continues to research local history and makes that information available to the public through exhibits such as the newly created Ross Home Colony display. Many people don't know, but for 2 years after the Civil War, the Freedmen's Bureau used Destrehan Plantation as a home for many ill and elderly former slaves who were in need of medical care, food, and clothing. The exhibit is described as a genealogical treasure, as the Ross Home Colony display includes the names and other information about the nearly 2,000 people who resided here. The commemoration of this event during Black History Month is timely, as our parish has a rich history and some notable milestones to celebrate this month. I'd like to take a moment just to mention a couple of folks in St. Charles Parish, and African Americans in St. Charles Parish, who have made history. Billy Raymond, who was the first black man to be appointed to the parish president's executive staff in 2016, and I'm honored to have him on my staff as well. Councilwoman Marilyn Bellock was the first black female to serve on our parish council and is the first black female chairwoman. Moon Urson, a lady from Destrehan High School, who now plays basketball for the Baylor Lady Bears, is the first ever player to secure 3 Gatorade Player of the Year awards in its history. And then Sherman Washington Jr., nicknamed the godfather of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival Gospel Tent, resided in Bootsy and led the world-renowned Zion Harmonizers, New Orleans' longest-running gospel vocal group established in the 1940s. While there's so many others in our parish who go unrecognized for their achievements and their contributions to our history, I applaud them and the River Parish Tourist Commission, as well as the staff at the Destrehan Plantation, for doing their part to ensure that our histories, both the good and the bad, are never forgotten. I encourage everybody to take the time to learn about the 1811 Slave Revolt, to visit the Destrehan Plantation and the other plantations along the river parishes. And thank you again, and congratulations to all involved that made this happen. Thank you.
So when thinking about the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail, it made me think of other trails, traces, and routes. They play an interesting part in our history. These lines leave different marks in the historical record. Sometimes it's commercial, like the mighty Mississippi River, which acts historically and presently as an economic artery in the heart of America. Often as geographical, routes can dictate roads, surveys, townships, our daily commute. Trails can also be deeply personal, which we see when we trace our ancestors in our family trees. Unfortunately, trails, traces, and routes can also highlight the worst of humankind, evidenced by such atrocities as the transatlantic slave trade and the Trail of Tears. But by memorializing America's first Freedom March, we are not simply creating an app, but we are commemorating a different kind of trail, a trail for liberation. And when we think of trails, we tend to think about the destination or the journey along the way. We think of the Mississippi River flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, roustabouts, cane talks, Mark Twain. We think of traffic jams and reroutes and property lines. We think of our Ancestry.com renewal price. And when we hear about the transatlantic slave trade, we tend to think about the ports of call that the enslaved ended up, such as New Orleans and Port-au-Prince, the Trail of Tears, Oklahoma. We tend not to think about the beginning of the route as often, but the genesis of that trace can be just as vital, from Lake Itasca, Minnesota, to our home, to the Congo of West Africa, or the military forts in East Tennessee, or to ourselves, who embody a unique composition of the ancestors we strive to learn about. That is why we at the 1811 Kid Ory Historic House are excited to be part of the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail. Our walls served as the genesis for a trail for liberation. When Charles Daylon and his fellow liberators entered the Andry Plantation House and subsequently struck Manuel Landry, it sparked a one-way route that they could not turn back on. And so that is, the Andry Plantation is now the 1811 Kid Ory Historic House. And as Madam President Hotard beautifully told you, a great description of our museum hours and that we are brand new. And we do hope that you will stop by when you are seeing the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail. Thank you.
I learned this word, ashe. Anybody heard of ashe? Ashe means be with us. When you say ashe, you are inviting your ancestors to join in the celebration. Ashe, ashe, ashe. Say it with me. Ashe. Say it with me. Ashe. Ashe. That was so powerful. I'm 63 years old and I just learned that, you guys. So there's so much that we do not know. So, it is very important for our generation to know that we are not the descendants of slaves. We are the descendants of people who were enslaved. Are you hearing me? We are not the descendants of slaves. We are the descendants of people who were enslaved and fought for their freedom since 1811 until today. Can I get an amen? Amen. All right. The current position that I stand in today is a result of their resistance. And we have to know that, and we have to embrace that, and we have to give them credit for that. All right? I say again, ashe, ashe, ashe. My husband and I are here with you today representing historic Riverlands. It's a valuable tourist attraction and a teaching tool located here in the River Parish. If you don't mind, I'm a little bit away from you, so I should be okay. The home of Historic Riverlands Church Tour, the Soul River Music Tour, and now the host site of the 1811 Slave Revolt Reenactment, which was held in November 2019. Historic Riverlands is dedicated to the education and preservation of African American contributions all over the world. Our tours will enlighten you and enthrall you as you experience the contributions of African Americans in the River Parish and throughout the world. It is our awesome privilege to preserve this history for generations to come. Well, we are honored today to be here, to be a part of this launch of the 1811 Slave Revolt. It's a 10-mile trail. This was actually one of the desires of Dred Scott, the artist who created the reenactment. He desired that the world would remember this place and this time in history when these brave people would be honored, recognized for their courage and their sacrifice that they made to break the bondage of slavery. So the reenactment is the living, breathing part. And while we are here today, our contribution Historic Riverlands brings is to preserve that. The living, breathing part of all that was presented here today, it takes it off of the pages and into your heart when you see this. So, it's very empowering to know that you are a descendant of people that paid an awesome price for their liberty, for their freedom. They didn't give up. They were not content. They fought. They pressed. Are you hearing me? Can I get an amen? So let me share with you today the story of how our involvement, Historic Riverlands, and what we're going to bring to the Slave Revolt Trail. It all started when we were participating in the 2019 River Parish Tourist Summit. Historic Riverlands was there because we're a tourist attraction. We have a historic church tour, which takes you back in days when Jim Crow came to church. Then we have a music exhibit, which chronicles the African American music contribution. So we were at this summit, all right, in 2019. I want to believe it was the first summit that we ever had, thanks to Buddy. And so we were there, and Larry Saraparu introduced us to a lady named Karen Livers, or Livers, I believe she pronounces it. Well, she informed us of the plans to reenact the 1811 Slave Revolt. That people from California to New York were coming to be a part of the Army of Enslaved. That media from Canada to Australia were all headed to the River Parishes in November for this national event. That Vanity Fair magazine had planned to do a story about it. So you can imagine how shocked I was that we knew nothing about it. This great big event that was coming to our parish in 2 months' time, and we knew nothing about it. And we're a historic site. So it's like, oh, okay. And this was in September, and the revolt was to begin in November. Now remember, I'm talking about the reenactment of this trail that people will take. I'm talking about living, breathing people animating the journey that their ancestors took. How awesome was that? And it's like, it's coming right here. It's going to start right here, and we know nothing about it. So anyway, we plan to meet again. You know, the summit was a success, and so we just moved on. To make a long story short, we found out that that was the plan. The plan was for no one to know. Now, does that take you back in time? They had to do this where no one would know. So I'm talking about today, but you revisit the past and come back to today, and revisit the past and come back today, okay? Because if you were going to plan any type of revolt, it had to be clandestine. So Dred Scott, which was the artist, had to only deal with a handful of people. And then once you said yes, you got drafted into the army of the enslaved. You received a booklet, which was your instruction booklet. Very well thought out, very well made. Can you imagine something like that happening in the past? So, we were inducted into the Army of the Enslaved. Glad to be a part of this awesome event. But we had the responsibility of keeping the Army a secret while we recruited others to attend. So that is the part that Historic Riverlands gets to bring to this 1811 slave revolt trail. The living, breathing reenactment of this time in history. And we do that through film footage, we do that through photos, and it's truly, truly amazing to my husband and I. This took 16 years in planning that 6 years of planning that Dred Scott had this vision to bring this to our backyard and reenact this event. It took 6 years in planning, over millions of dollars in a budget, and then God just brought it to our front door and is allowing us to preserve this for generations to come. We think that that is awesome. So lastly, can you imagine chanting? And there's so much more with the reenactment, because he literally reenacted from the woodland plantation, where they marched, when they got to the levee, and the different stops, and what happened at the different stops, the same things I'm sure you have on the kiosk. Well, we did that in person. 500 people with sickles and blades and chanting, freedom or death. Freedom or death. Can you think about that? Freedom or death. If you were in bondage and you had to go through what they went through, that's a viable choice. Freedom or death. Think about that. We chanted, "On to New Orleans. We're going to end slavery. Join us." And I'll leave you with that.
I just want to thank everyone that participated today. I think the message was clear, that this was thoughtful, it was deliberate, and it was meant to honor and bring forward the past into the present. I'd like to thank our team at the River Parishes Tourist Commission, Raina Jackson, Ms. Wilma Harvey in the back, Andre Watkins, and Denise Burrell. We're a small group, and so we all have to pitch in, even when we're launching everything from an Ondewee Trail to the 1811 Slave Revolt Trail. We're all present.
Okay, Pastor, I can take it with you home. I'm sending it. We'll send it to you. Okay.
Rita, what was the chant? Ashe? Ashe.
Ashe.
3, 2, 1. Ashe.
Oh, there you go.
We cut the ribbon on, or cut the chain actually, and that is symbolic, and that's on purpose, because the revolt was about demanding freedom. Today's trail is about honoring that struggle. So today we unveiled the kiosk at Destrehan Plantation. The other kiosk is at the beginning of the trail, which is the 1811 Kid Ory House. And today we had a host of local elected officials and stakeholders all here honoring what we think's the completion of the story of the River Parishes complex history regarding plantations and slavery and our culture, and how a lot of our people got here. They didn't come here, they were brought here. And telling their story and where they ended up is part of our future journey, and that's going to be told in the Headwaters project, which will get launched later this month, where we tell the story of the enslaved, where they came from, and really start putting together those puzzle pieces for people whose a lot of their history was ignored, erased, or forgotten, and we're going to try to start putting that back together.
My heart is really heavy and filled with joy at the same time, because these people did take a stand to do something, and they did represent well. And I'm proud to be ancestors of those same 200 to 500 enslaved people that took that stand. It means so much for us today, and it means a lot for us to educate those coming on behind us for that strength, that power, that discernment that those people had to take that step to do what they did.
We are preserving history. To be a part of this, what Dred Scott started, to remind us of the battles and the struggles that our people had to endure to bring us to where we are today. As someone has said, we're standing on their shoulders to have the freedom that we have today. My father, many stories he told me as a young man growing up here in the South. He lived to be 89, my uncle lived to be 102. And to hear the stories that they told me as a child, what it was like, even to have having known about the beheading of the slaves, I heard those stories as a young man. So to just know that we are preserving history, it means a lot. And even my church, it was built in the River Parishes in 1937 during the Jim Crow laws, and it was the first black Catholic church built in the River Parish. And I moved back from Los Angeles in 1987, and God gave us the building, and we had to pick it up and physically move it to another location. And we also are preserving history of the legacy of what our people had to go through during those Jim Crow laws. And here today I own that particular facility.
It is of the utmost important for us to realize that we are descendants, people of color, people that look like me, who stand in the positions they stand today. We are descendants not of slaves, but from a people who were enslaved, who continuously fought for their freedom. That's empowering. And those are the people who I stand. The things that I've been able to accomplish is because they did what they had to do. They made the awesome sacrifices for us. So how could I not be proud of them? I'm not ashamed of them. I am proud of they were able to do what many today couldn't do.
This area has such a rich history. This year we're celebrating the tricentennial of the German coast back in 1721. And we all know that we're standing on the backdrop of a beautiful plantation in the River Parishes. There are several plantations along there. So a lot of history, both good and bad, in the River Parishes. And as I stand in front of the Destrehan plantation and think about Charles Paquet, who was the enslaved African American who designed and built this house, it's really a great day to be able to honor people like him and the people who were a part of the 1811 slave revolt.
For people to learn the history, because it's relevance of what we're doing today and continuing the struggle of fairness and equality in our society. And folks back in 1811, the enslaved that uprose and marched down River Road with the probably knowing that the outcome would be death, or there was a great possibility it would be. And so, but yet they were willing to do it and for freedom. And here we are 210 years later, continuing the struggle of fairness and equality in our system.
We're hoping it gives people who sometimes didn't want to come to our region because the perception was we only celebrated the history of plantations, to give them a reason to come here to remember the struggles, learn more about the struggles, whether they're black or white or Native American or any other minority group, but a reason to come here and learn about a people who demanded more and demanded freedom. But also we hope that it gives people who might be descendants of former enslaved a reason to come here and learn about their family's history, and so they can come here to complete that family puzzle.
How can people get more information?
They can go to the 1811slaverevolt.com. The entire revolt map is there. The audio tour is there. All the information on the revolters is actually there. So when a visitor goes to the website, they're told the name of one of the revolters, what their role was on the plantation, what plantation they worked, and then at the end of the tour, they find out if they were beheaded, sentenced to death, or if they escaped. So all of that information is also available on our normal website, lariverparishes.com, but for this specific initiative, it's 1811slaverevolt.com.